So I want to take a second just to begin the conversation and then take us through what I think is an essential part of the work that we do. First of all, anybody here nervous? Yeah, I bet you are. The truth is that the real work that you do is so much harder than what you're going to do through this process. It's so much more important than the specifics of this prize, because what you're doing every single day is changing the lives of a nation. And I understand, Jeannie, as many people say, as many people say that they don't want to get political when talking about education, but the most political thing is to transform what is taught to people for whom such a conversation was not to have occurred. And even more important, providing access to those people for whom education was never supposed to be accessible is the most revolutionary thing that anybody can do. And so in order to do that, we obviously need rich friends. The most important thing that we can do in order to make the impact that needs to be made is not by private money. It's by transforming the educational process in this country by moving public money with the public's children. And the only way that happens is if we transform who is advocating for us. I'll finish here as we go through this panel. It's imperative that we understand that the left, the teachers union in particular, has benefited from the education industrial complex in a way in which no other organization has ever. So we need to have a more sophisticated conversation to make it possible for the educational orbit that the Yass family has brought together to be the reality for the nation. So as we move forward, I do want us to take a second to acknowledge Jeff and Janine for the work that they do, because it is vital. And thus begins our conversation. One of the things I said I didn't want to do is to give people, read their bios. You know, those folks who go to church, they read the announcements. You're like, wow, that took a long time. But I do want to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves by saying something that's important about them. And then we're going to begin the conversation.
I'm Phil Christofanelli. I'm a state legislator in suburban St. Louis, St. Charles County. I've served in the State House for 7 years, and I first got involved in school choice as a private school student, and my parents were able to send me to a private Catholic school in central Illinois, where I grew up, and there I met people that changed my life, people that told me that I had value, that I had potential, and that put me on a trajectory to ultimately, run for office and try to make a difference myself. And so I've tried to spend my 7 years in the legislature giving the opportunity that I had to other students across our state, where right now in the city of St. Louis, we've got in our public schools nearly 1/3 of students that could be classified as illiterate. And it's such a tragedy to watch this unfold while we have the power to change it. And so that's what I've been working to do in my time in the State House.
Thank you, Representative.
Is it still morning? I don't know. Good morning. I am Janel Artis-Wright. I'm the Executive Director for the Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools, which is an organization that exclusively advocates for Black and brown charter school leadership and expansion across the country. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we are changing our name to Choice, because in our communities we are finding that charter schools, although they are a really good option, we need more options, and we could talk a little bit more about that. But I think what's most important to know about me is that I'm a mother of 3 children. I come into this work both from a public policy background, but also as a parent who has exercised my parental choice. My kids went to charters for 2 years. My son graduated from a very high affluent public school. And I'm a practitioner of what I am advocating for every day. I've seen what happens when my children have been put in schools that they didn't do well in, and I've seen what happened when they've been put in schools that they have done well in. And so this work is both, professional and personal for me because I've lived it and I know what it means to be able to have access to quality and how it transforms our communities.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Alisha Thomas-Searcy. I'm a former state legislator from Georgia. Was elected at 23, first African-American elected from Cobb County. If you know anything about Cobb County in Georgia, woo! A quick story that I will share as a part of my introduction. I grew up in Florida and was raised as a leader in the NAACP. So you could imagine that I wasn't exactly a charter school supporter as I was growing up through the organization. But when I was in the legislature in my early years, I had some interaction with students at a KIPP charter school. And I was blown away that kids were calling this one teacher to ask him to pick them up because they missed the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what kid is calling a teacher to go to school? Like, what is going on here? So I knew something different was happening in that school. Since then, in Georgia, probably thanks to some people in this room, we passed in 2012 the State Charter School Commission. Yay! For those of you who are a part of that, thank you, thank you, thank you. Jeannie, thank you. And I still wear a lot of scars from that battle, but very proud of the work that we did because we have a whole bunch of schools open as a result of that. I've also served as a charter school network leader, also known as a superintendent in Georgia because they're their own LEAs. And so I come to this work as obviously a former state legislator, policymaker, a former superintendent, and also a mom of 3 school-aged children. I also ran in 2022 for state school superintendent. And when I actually ran in 2014 and lost in a primary, it was quite bruising, primarily because of my support for charter schools. And I wanted nothing to do with politics after that. And so for 8 years, I did nothing other than vote. But in 2022, I decided that I would do this again, this time being proud of my support for charter schools, wearing my scars, being very unapologetic about that. And then I also, qualified the week of, so people didn't quite know that I was going to run this time. That helped a lot too.
To be strategic.
Hello. But I share that because I went from not winning the primary in 2014 to winning the primary without a runoff in a 4-way race in 2022. And so it taught me some very powerful lessons about being unapologetic about what we believe in and having the right messaging and helping people to understand why we do what we do.
Stay there for a second, Alisha. You mentioned the scars. Now, it's sort of like before people get married, everyone says, yeah, it's hard. And they're like, how hard could it possibly be? They get married. When you say scars, for some of these folks who are brand new to this life, you and Chris, what are some of the scars? Because y'all are in red states. I mean, I'm in blue, don't mind myself, I'm in blue states where people say that they care about our children but get to run away. Can you talk about some of those scars and between you, because this is a conversation. Be as specific as possible because I want people to understand, if nothing else, that you are not alone.
Yeah.
And what you're dealing with wherever you are, right? Wade is in Wichita, who you'll meet. And after he opened his school, they passed an ordinance that says that a closed school can never be used as a school again.
Wow.
A black man opens a school in his own community to serve his children, and an ordinance is passed that you may never use a school building. You can use it for anything. You can sell weed out of it. But you can't teach children in it ever again. So we need to break down, deconstruct what some of those scars, where the scars come from, who they are, because not everybody's speaking the same language. So start with Chris and then go to Alisha.
So,
Phil, why am I calling Chris? Yeah, sorry.
yeah, that's my last name.
Jesus.
In Missouri, education is the single most divisive issue in the legislature, hands down, because it cuts across both, ideological lines and party lines. On the right, there is an extreme divide in our caucus. We have a supermajority, over 113 legislators out of 163 are Republicans. But rural Republicans are very opposed to
Talk
any
about that,
type
because I don't think people understand. I think people think that the right is for school choice, but there's a chasm between the rural Republicans and more, let's say, suburban, and I guess if there are urban Republicans.
Not really, but
It's kind of like a jumbo shrimp, right?
I'm about as urban as it gets. Yeah. So yes, many of the legislators in Missouri represent rural districts, and you have a school that is probably the #1 employer in that district. So you have a superintendent that has access to jobs and money and contracts where there's very little other economic activity going on. They feel very strongly that the school is the center of their community. There's a strong attachment to the athletic programs that surround those schools and the teams that are associated with them. And they view any sort of change to the system as a threat. Missouri is also unique in that we have over 525 school districts for 6 million people. You compare that to Florida, which I think has 1 per county, and something like 18 million people. And so with each of those school districts, you have your own little mini bureaucracy. And so you'll have a rural state legislator that'll have 7 school districts in their little house district, and each of those is going to have a powerful superintendent with a lot of political influence. And they're each going to have a little school board with 6 or 7 many politicians on them running around with networks of their own. I remember when I was trying to pass the ESA bill, I went and met with a rural legislator, and we talked about the issue for hours, it seemed like. And at the end, he said, I'm convinced, but I got to tell you, I represent over 100 school board members, and I'm scared of these people. And I don't know how to convince somebody when that is the reality. And so there is a political system that's designed to oppose change. They have a lot of arrows in their quiver, and it's not just the teachers union. It's the superintendents, the school boards association, the school administrators association, and the teachers union, all working in tandem to pressure legislators to oppose change.
So one of the things that's important, as I've come to you, Alisha, to understand is that they are in opposition to your existence. We've created something a little different, and I wanted you to talk, Janel, about how important it is for us to have a voice, especially African Americans and Latinos, in this conversation, why that's so, and how willing we have to be to go further than they do to stop them from coming after our people. Talk a bit about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and the first thing I'll say is that I ain't never scared. And so our organization, with Dr. Perry being our board chair, we pride ourselves on being an organization that is like, I wish you would try to come after our schools. I wish you would try to come after what we're trying to do. But that is a very lonely space to be in. I think the dynamic that our diplomacy appears is trying to say is that there is this polarizing, more so now in education than we've seen probably since the 1950s. And so on the right, you have the need for school choice and wanting to do more. And obviously in more of our Republican states, I'll have to say that they are doing more for school choice. However, there's also the dynamic of not wanting to have culturally affirming schools. And so as a person of color, we either have to make strange bedfellows and being able to support school choice options, but also knowing that that's actually going directly against what it means to be an African American or Latino in this space. which is even more alarming because when you look at the statistics, 70% of public school students are African American and Latino. So then you lean over to the Democratic side and you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, you see the statistic, you see here that we need more African American teachers, we need more African American and Latino studies, but yet you are against those because of the charter narrative, because the unions have done a dynamic job for more than 10 years of just demonizing charters specifically. So thankfully, I think that there is more of a coalition of people that are in the middle, and what happens in the middle is, support like what we're seeing now, where you have people who are saying, you have the innovation, you have the autonomy, what's missing? What's missing is the funding. We need more people to be more bold and more courageous about allowing things like the STOP Awards to be more optional for us. There's also this dynamic of fear, and I think you mentioned it, and that's not changing. Just this past week, I was at a convention that Ed Choice put on, and we talked to about, I think, 14 legislators. 5 of them right now, Black legislators, are being threatened to be primaried next year because of their support for school choice. So it's something that's still happening. And we were talking to them, and after the meetings and sitting down and having dinner with them, I'm like, okay, so what do you have on your table? And I think you mentioned it earlier that for a lot of these Black legislators and Latino legislators, this position of power is the highest position they've ever had. So they're trying to hold on to that. Because they want to stay in office. This is an opportunity for them to actually have some sort of change. Absolutely. But there's a trifecta there, and that is the power of a position, the power of people, and the power of money. And those 2 things they hardly ever tap into because of the fear factor and just feeling like I have to stay with my caucus. I have to be here because if I don't, I'm going to be primaried. And then I'm back in my community, not even able to share any type of power with what we're trying to do. And so what we're trying to do is educate them more about the need to understand that you have nothing to lose by standing on principles. And you are a prime example of that. And if nothing else, you have to, because in the end, they're going to do what they want to do anyway.
Talk a bit about some of the moves that the Freedom Coalition has made from the debates,
right,
to all the way through some of the things that you're doing today.
And this is really interesting too, because the Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools actually was drawn out of an agitation with the National Charter School Network that pretty much just seemed either complicit or too comfortable with the place that charter schools were in this space. And so in 2019, a group of us got together and said, you know what, it is not okay for the Democratic Party to have a presidential platform saying that it's going to put a moratorium on charter schools. And several people, like you said, remain nameless because they're supposed to be colleagues, basically said, well, let's just keep low and let's not be concerned about that. And
I'm gonna pause you right there because I want to make sure that I highlight this point. We're not talking about the right. We're talking about people who are supposed to be in our movement who told Black and Latin legislators, stand down during this presidential campaign. Do not speak up at all.
Yeah.
Don't. Otherwise, we'll contact your funders and others to make it so that you can't even exist. So we're clear. We're not talking about the ops. We're talking about our friends, our allies. So
Right.
with that.
And with that, we basically had to do like the epitome of grassroots. I think at the most we had like $30,000 that we pulled together, like $30,000 literally, and we were going.
I didn't know we had that much.
But that was basically to manage a lot of the strategies behind the scenes, and it was literally grassroots with us going to these debates. It started off in Houston, where we were specifically talking to about 300 students and families. By the time we got to Ohio, I got to meet Crazy Chris Gillespie-Worrell, and we were literally walking down the streets with people on the right who had machine guns and were wanting to support, the First Amendment. And we're saying, hey, what about charter schools,
It's kind of hard to discuss school choice with a person who's got an AK.
Yeah.
You're like, you're right.
But the reality is that the fact that it was Black and Latino leadership together, which often you don't see in this space either, we were very adamant about this is something that's impacting our families, our students the most. we were out there, and we were out there in full force. By the time we got to Atlanta, we had galvanized about 2,500 schools, organizations, students. We had a marching band. We were like, look, you are not going to ignore us. So not only did we not silence ourselves, but we actually got louder. And then ultimately, when we got to Los Angeles, we were up to about 3,500. And again, learning that the dynamics that we see, we used social media, we used, earned media with having the New York Times get involved. But now fast forward, there were other things that were happening because again, when we did that, it was kind of like, okay, well, I see that you're doing something here, but like I'm a little bit nervous about if you're actually going to be able to have some impact. And so our next fight was basically to find the Secretary of Education, which was Miguel Cardona. And we were challenging another candidate for that, who's still in that position, but Cindy Martin. And the irony about that is that Cindy Martin came out of San Diego, where the NAACP actually went against the rule of not supporting charter schools because of the atrocities that were happening to Black kids in San Diego on the hands of Cindy Martin. And so now she's up for the state Secretary of Education position. So just every single time we were told, no, you shouldn't do it, we said, nah, we're gonna do this.
That's why thank you so much. So Phil, talk about what has worked in Mizzou.
So, you all talked about the pressure that you felt from the left, and that's not fun. But I've had to put pressure on my colleagues, and I'm not above recruiting primaries for guys that don't want to stand up for kids in school choice. And so I went around the state. I've recruited dozens of candidates to run for state legislature, and I interview them exhaustively for hours with hypotheticals of, okay, if the superintendent comes in and says, this is going to hurt our school, what are you going to do? Eventually you got to find people with courage and character, and then you got to hold them accountable. So, we get all our guys to fill out surveys. I worked with all the grassroots organizations across the state to be like, okay, these are the ones, and here are their surveys. If they ever break their word, make sure people know. And we've done that. We've held our party accountable. And if you run on school choice, you better vote for school choice, or there's going to be consequences. And so
I just want to pause there because I want you to, folks, this is for real politics. If there are no consequences, then there will be no change. So, because I want people to understand that we don't exist if our only hope is to find some people who are wealthy to support us. It's just too expensive to even run micro schools, to always be able to find whoever the wealthiest person is in your community, state, or region. It's just not possible. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of dollars languish. So can you talk about some of the consequences? Because people have to understand.
Yeah, we make very clear that when we were passing the ESA bill that this was the most important priority in the State House, and we had to use every ounce of our political leverage just to move it through the system and get the bare minimum number of votes that we needed to pass it, 82 votes. And so I was the rules chairman of the time, the Speaker of the House, this was his top priority, and we pretty much sat on every bill of any person that wasn't on board with the agenda. And that costs a lot of political capital, and you lose a lot of friends and you make a lot of enemies, but they're simply not willing to do what we need to do unless you are willing to bring an equal level of tactics to counter them. And so that's what we did to pass the ESA bill. I sat on the gas tax bill until the last day of session, which was the Senate Pro Tem President's top priority for the year. And eventually they brought our ESA bill to the floor and they passed it because they wanted their other stuff.
Alisha, can you talk about how you guys won? Because again, what tactics did you have to use to make it happen?
So in the constitutional amendment that we passed, I think what was most effective was having a really diverse coalition.
Talk about that. Break that down for folks.
And I think it's one of the challenges that we have in this movement, and I saw it with our ESA bill in Georgia this year, which got as far as it's ever been, but the coalition was very white and very Republican. And what we know, all the polling...
I just want to pause there because I just want people to understand. What happens when the the people who are leading the charge come from just one side, it exposes us. So talk more about the diversity and what you guys did.
So what we know from the polling, we've seen it for a decade, I think, that Democrats support choice, particularly public school choice, absolutely. And I think the private school choice is increasing. And so our coalition was statewide. It was diverse racially and politically. We had a lot of support, again, folks in the room and around the country who helped to fund these public information campaigns, right? Town hall meetings.
Talk about what you shared for public information, because there's a lot of things that because you do this for a living, you just know. Like when they say that you're privatization and that you're taking money away and that you're not educating when they make up these goofy things, we're like, that's a lie. Like you don't engage it. But what did you have to dispel? Like what?
I mean, all of the myths, right? And we did it because what I know very well is that it's not always the message, but it's the messenger. So we we partnered with families of color, right? We got charter school families involved. And so we had town hall meetings, we had commercials, television and radio. And so people across the state got a chance to see what it looks like to have families of all colors, right, of all backgrounds who want choice. What we know about parents, those of us who are parents, we don't care what the school is called. We just want a great school. And so that was the messaging. It was about acknowledging that in the Clayton counties of Georgia and DeKalb and Atlanta, where at that time I think the graduation rate was 50% in APS. And so and even though the numbers on paper say it's more than that now, it's probably similar to that now. But we leveraged the fact that parents want choices. And so we talked about that everywhere we went. And we leveraged that campaign. What we also found out when it passed, the strongest Democratic areas across the state, so Savannah, Georgia, DeKalb, Atlanta, Clayton, all of those voted overwhelmingly in favor of the charter amendment. And so it was confirmation for all of us who had sacrificed a lot to get that passed. And so after that, right, there was also the need, and this is where we kind of dropped the ball, we didn't keep those families engaged. And so that's what we're trying to do now is, now that we have over 100 new charter schools started as a result of this commission, we've got to get those families involved in the process. We've got to get charter school leaders who, yes, I've been one. I ran a network of schools. I understand how important the job is, but your voices are important at the state capitol, in the school board meetings, so that legislators and school board members can understand the power, right, of the people that are in their district who they serve.
So coming to Janel in a second, one of the things that I think that we overlook in this big political conversation is what I refer to as cookout conversations. These are the conversations that occur when somebody says, I hate charter schools. I mean, I like yours, but I hate charter schools. I hate private schools, but I like yours. And you let that walk, right? It's like somebody throws down a 3 of diamonds and you let that walk in spades. Like, how is that possible? Explain that to the person next to you. It'll take a little time. So it's not poker. But you might give me a poker, but I'll throw it on you in some spades. Sorry. I digress. But these cookout and informal conversations that happen so much of your life, you have an obligation to speak up. Thanksgiving is coming. Somebody's going to say something about what you do. You need to check some folks on, hey, Dad, you need to stop because I know you send your kids to school. Can you talk, I want you to respond to some of what Alisha was saying, but also talk about some of the organizations that you've begun to connect to who are not typically seen as ed choice people, but are.
Do you mean like the micro schools and the homeschool folks?
Them as well as the Jack and Jill.
Yeah, so one of the things that we realized, very similar to what you were saying, is that foundationally it's about having a strong coalition. And what's even better is if you have a bipartisan coalition. And what we've been doing is trying to form those. We're in 10 regions across the country, and in each one uniquely looking at and seeing who are the main power players in those states, and how many of them are invested basically in education, which you find everyone is, But there's so many players, like, for the Black communities, the affluent Black communities, everyone has like a Jack and Jill club that you're
Can you
a
just
part of.
explain what that is? Not everyone knows.
So Jack and Jill is basically I'm not in Jack and Jill, so I don't, forgive me for people who are here that I don't want
Alisha, are
to
you in
do
Jack
a
and Jill?
disservice.
I am not.
But Jack and Jill
A couple
is,
Jack and Jill is here.
I mean, what it is basically a social club that a lot of affluent African Americans basically formed, primarily in suburban areas, because, like most things, there's still discriminatory practices. So that when you have your family and you come into a new community, you want to be able to be a part of a group that you feel welcomed. And
So many of us who have at least one degree were invited to join this group. Who have children, especially if you live in a largely white area. For your children have children who are in the same
who look like
basic
them and are
circumstances.
learning from
They
them.
do social activities. So it's Jack and Jill is the name. There are others, but Jack and Jill is the largest, unless someone's going to tell me another one's larger.
And it's really important to note that I was actually speaking to someone earlier about how, for Black and brown families that are middle class or upper class, you still have a challenge when you even have choice to be able to go to the top elite private schools, because then you find that you still have your child being one of few. And so you're the token Black kid, token brown kid in an area. And again, that's why that cultural affirming stuff is so important. And so that you never escape it. Like, you always have to be fighting for this ability to have choice and power and options and an affirmation that you need to be there. And so that is what we wanted to include in the Freedom Coalition for Choice, is that it's not just about showing up in our most poorest, most marginalized communities, but also showing up in spaces where there's power and there's positionality that can also move the needle forward, specifically on the political side. And the last thing I'll say is we've also started a series on meeting with leaders and lawmakers, and having charter school leaders specifically, or school leaders specifically. If you have a micro school or homeschool, I welcome you to reach out to me. Find a space where, like you said, kind of like a cookout. You break bread with with legislators and lawmakers, and just ask the hard questions. What is the problem here? Like, why are you not supporting this when you've got majority of us in your district and we want this opportunity? And we found that they have some profound statements. Most of them is that they're scared and that they need cover. And then again, with cover comes funding, because as a C3, you need to have a C4 backing as well, so that you can be a part of those powerful conversations, to be able to run your own mailers against people who are basically trying to damage your name.
Okay, so we had a couple minutes to tell me to wrap. So just a couple things I want to add to what Janel is saying. There are organizations that you may not typically think of as school choice in their focus, but in their practice are. AAU. So many young people who play AAU don't mind which school they go to. They're not bound by the neighborhood school. They're large and organized. We don't think about Cub Scouts. We don't think about other organizations of parents who are not tripping over where their child goes to school. They just want the best. And these are involved parents who are spending the time. So think of those organizations as you're building coalitions, as Alisha was talking about earlier, that are both bipartisan, multicultural, and willing to do the work. Because it's important. You're going to need them. You're going to need them. Phil, can you talk about what works and what you have planned going forward?
I think that the future's bright for Missouri. We're about to get a new governor. We're about to get, hopefully, a more functional Senate. And we have a lot of work to do, because we're trailing behind many other states when it comes to education choice, especially Republican states. And so right now, we need statewide charter school expansion. Right now, you can only have them in St. Louis and Kansas City, very tiny pockets. And so we need to bring that out into all the schools that are failing to teach their kids to grade level. We need to increase and expand our education savings account program that we passed in 2021. Right now, that allowed 1,300 kids to attend a school of their choice, but we can get that number up into the tens of thousands and be in line with many other states. And also, we need accountability for schools in the public system that are not getting the job done. Right now, they inflate all of the accountability numbers with a myriad quantitative data that doesn't have anything to do with student achievement and growth, like how many books are in the library or how many professional development days your teachers had, which are all wonderful things, but it doesn't matter if the kids can't read.
Exactly.
So
Amen.
we need to reform our accountability system, use actual metrics that provide real information to parents about how well or not well their public school is doing, because I think if the parents see, because everybody believes their school is doing well, but if the parents actually knew how bad some of these schools were, I think that they'd be crying out for choice options.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Janelle, look, you guys can applaud that.
You know, I think that it's important that we know that the public education system that we are in is broken. I was looking at the name of this, and it should say states that are stuck on stupid, because literally what we are up against, so we know that there's a high teacher attrition. We know that learning loss has happened across the board. And at the same time, we're still looking at these standards and these positions on schools that don't make any sense. I mean, right now in California, they're fighting on co-location for buildings that are empty. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. So we talk about teacher attrition, and we want to increase diversity in the teacher pipeline, but then we got to make sure that they still take a certain certification that doesn't even really determine whether they can be a good teacher or not. I mean, the system is just completely messed up. And a lot of the states that are running these are some of our high-powered states with high-powered unions, and they're literally stuck on stupid. And so it is really, I'm encouraging everybody to just be courageous more than anything, and just really fight for what we know is, right, even if it doesn't seem like you have the Army behind you, because what we've seen is that the Army will come. If you stand on your principle, if you stand on your values, if you eliminate the noise and deal with what's right, we need to make sure that our kids are reading on grade level. And let me just say one point about that, because someone raises about parents, and I asked someone, okay, so we know that third graders aren't reading on grade level, and so what does that mean for a parent? What are we not telling that parent? We are telling that parent that that child didn't learn 300 sight words within a school year. We're telling that parent that they cannot, that child cannot have a fluency of reading 120 words per minute within a school year. So if that's the problem, I'm not concerned about the student. I'm concerned about the person that had a whole school year to teach that child that and somehow didn't do it, right? And so that even that accountability metrics is important for us to name and be able to educate our parents so they understand what does it mean when your child is falling behind.
Thank you. We can applaud that. All right, everyone say it with me. Alisha.
And if you live in Georgia, remember Alisha Thomas-Searcy, just in case you see it on the ballot ever
Say it again.
Yes.
Alisha Thomas-Searcy.
So a couple of things. Here's what I learned on the campaign trail that I think it was a great indicator for what I think should happen, certainly in Georgia and across the country. When we look at our education system, and I'm going to speak for Georgia, because when I hear micro schools and home schools, we're not there yet in Georgia. But if we look at our classrooms, it looks just like it did in the late 1800s, right? Not a whole lot has changed. We're still having fights about curriculum. And so my biggest concern with education is that we are still delivering a telegram education to a TikTok generation. And so what I believe in my heart of hearts, those of us who know that choice for so many students, and certainly was the case for me as I grew up in Florida, choice is the thing that levels the playing field. Mm-hmm. It says that no matter what community I may come from or live in, or where my parents went to school or didn't, if I go to the right school that works for me, I have a chance at life, right? I have a chance at being successful. I think where we miss is that we're not talking about the other issues enough, those of us who believe in choice. I think we need to be talking about literacy. We need to be talking about the science of reading and the fact that only now 23 or 24 states have adopted the science of reading. And we shouldn't be talking about sight words anymore, right? We should be talking about phonemic awareness and how students are actually learning to read, and dyslexia and all the challenges that we're seeing. I think we need to talk seriously about school safety and not just the threats from the outside, but what's happening on the inside and what it means for students to go to school every day, and do they feel physically safe? Yeah. Do they feel emotionally safe? Are they going to school where they feel loved and respected and honored for the communities that they come from? Mm-hmm. I do think we need to talk about not from a teachers union standpoint, but how we support teachers. Teachers are catching hell in classrooms right now. And we don't talk enough about that. And I think those of us who are in this community, we need to stand up for teachers because, frankly, I don't see their organizations that they're paying money to standing up for them in ways that they deserve. And then, of course, mental health. And so there are issues that I think we can talk about that give us more credibility.
Certainly.
That help people to understand we aren't talking about taking money away from public schools or privatizing education. We're talking about doing what's best for kids. And so that is what I would leave you all with. My favorite quote is by Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. It says that every person is born into this world to do something distinctive and something unique.
All right.
And if he or she doesn't do it, it will never be done.
Okay.
And so when I think about the work that we've talked about today, I think about the work that all of you do. It's so important, it's so necessary, and if we don't do it, it'll never be done.
Copy. All right, folks, give it up for your panel.